All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Piccinato. I'm here to talk about React and Redux. How many people know of React and Redux? How many people work with React and Redux or have worked with it? That is going to be great. We got one.
It keeps going in and out. Yeah.
I'll try not to move. Hopefully it will work. Okay. So a little background on myself. I'm currently CTO at a company called Sift, where I manage our engineering team. We are full in on React and Redux for our front-end web applications and React Native for our mobile apps for iOS and Android. I've been doing application development for about 8 years now. I started with iOS way back when iPhone 3GSs were out and iPhone 4s. Did a startup that did an iOS app called UpTo. It was a calendar social application. Didn't work out, kind of closed shop after about 3.5 years. And then I started another company with a couple of those same guys called StockX, which was one of the sponsors. It's a stock market for sneakers. If everyone's kind of familiar with Air Jordans and whatnot, you can buy and sell and trade them as if they're stocks. It's kind of neat. That whole website was actually built in React. They might have converted to Redux. It was using something prior to Redux called Flux, which is kind of the predecessor to Redux. But that whole thing is now, I think, React and Redux in full. And then I joined Sift to help build out the engineering team. The application that we had was in Angular 1, which version was it? Like version 1X, one of those versions. And Angular 2 was coming out, and that was a big change in how Angular worked, and everything would have to be rewritten to go to Angular 2, so we decided, hey, why not give React and Redux a try, so we dove all into that for our applications. So I'll go into React. So a little housekeeping. The code examples are JavaScript. They are ES6, ES7 syntax, so they have classes, arrow functions, there's a spelling mistake, spready operator, the spread operator.
Keep short now.
It's the connection.
Keep talking. React doesn't require these things. Oh, go ahead.
It's a connection between the projector and the adapter, not in between your laptop.
That might be one of these.
Yeah. They gave us about 10 of these damn things. So.
Yeah, I don't know why there's 10 of them, because one of them works. No, that's all right.
Does anybody have a micro USB cable? Off chance? Micro USB? USB to micro USB?
I've got one.
Maybe this adapter will work.
I've got a micro USB power adapter.
Yeah, that works.
At least it was also on his computer, not just the Mac.
Yeah, that's what, and I'm getting a clear picture here.
You are?
Yeah.
Should I also plug in maybe?
Yeah.
We are on the slide that says, "Feel free to interrupt at any time."
Yes. Feel free to interrupt anytime. I'll try this.
We're getting our interruptions money worth now.
Okay. You can also try plugging this. This key is full. Now my key is
Charge only. Something.
Charge only would be okay.
stabilized. Let's give this a go. Oh, stay course. Don't run on the
Don't
stage.
trip on the cable.
Yeah.
Let's give this a go. I mean, I could also plug in if there's power nearby.
You want to use my laptop? Or not my laptop?
And you use my directly, and you don't just like plug it in directly to the projector.
Stand over there and talk from the. We'll give this a run, I guess. Give it a try.
Craig, you have to stand there.
Yeah, don't move.
It's like back when I was in, back at home, stand there, okay.
Mm-hmm. When the cell phone didn't work.
Tread lightly. Okay.
So yes, feel free to interrupt at any time. If you have any questions about any of the syntax in the code, or if something that I explained is not clear, or you want to know a bit more, please feel free to ask questions, especially since it's a newer topic for most of you. So what is React? This actually comes directly from the docs. React is a declarative, efficient, and flexible JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It lets you compose complex UIs from small and isolated pieces of code called components. One of the things that a lot of people like to emphasize is that React is not a framework. It is a simple view library. Unlike others like Vue and Angular and some other ones out there, it doesn't come with any real opinionated way to do state management, to do API access. Like, there's no network library for it. You can use any network library that's out there. It's just meant to be a lightweight view library. It's declarative. So creating interactive UIs should be painless, and React helps do that. You can design simple views for the states of your application, and React will take care of drawing those efficiently, and it'll render the right components when those components need to update. So with the components, you can build encapsulated components that manage their own state, then compose them to make complex UIs. Since component logic is written in JavaScript instead of templates, you can easily pass rich data through your app and keep state out of DOM. These descriptions, again, they come straight from the React documentation. The React documentation is really good, so if you really want to do a deep dive on React, I suggest reading that documentation. So why would you want to choose React for a project? We find that it being declarative, predictable, gives you confidence, gives you reliability. That's from Tom Ochino. There's a great, I'll preface this with also, all these slides are available online afterwards. You can pull them in. There's links to different references in them. Tom Ochino does a great talk, and this was 3 years ago, on React, and it's evolved quite a bit from there, but these same principles still apply. React also helps promote one-way data flow. I don't know if everyone's familiar with other things like two-way data binding, where I change the model, it updates this, and like just there's a two-way talk going on. That can create a lot of complexity in applications, like who's updating what. React helps promote like single flow, like I update this thing, it just goes down through my state tree, or my component tree, updates all the components, and then it starts again. So once you change data somewhere and props change, we're getting to what props are, everything else will just start to re-render, and it'll re-render efficiently and re-render when it should. The learning curve to React is, it's pretty quick. You can get up and running with it really quickly, but it does take a bit to kind of think in React. It's a different way of composing UIs. Yeah?
I have a question. Have you used Vue or like something simple like that?
I have used Vue a little bit just to kind of play around with it. I haven't built a large application with Vue.
I guess what I was curious is, like with React, I've always heard it's pretty complex. So
It
if
can
you're
get
like an
complex,
occasional
yeah.
dabbler, Vue is pretty easy. So
Yeah. Vue offers
Is this like only for full-time people, or?
React.
Yeah, like if you're a full-time front end, and this is great, but if you're just a dabbler, is it kind of or I guess what do you think about that?
That's a good
Like,
question.
if you're a full stack person, so you just occasionally do JS, you're not like a front end guy, is this a good
So
choice?
I should relate myself to being a front end guy. I've been doing front end for quite a while now. As much as I never really wanted to associate myself a lot of time with front end, but these applications I like to make now better than the traditional CSS HTML kind of jQuery old way of doing things. I don't think I'd have to use Vue again, but I think you can go either way. It kind of just depends on what you're trying to do, really. Vue comes with some other two-way additional binding. It comes with a lot out of the box. React really just says, I draw views. So you can kind of compose it in different ways. We'll kind of get into how that can be. I don't think that really answered, but it kind of depends. React the only option? No, it's not. Vue is out there, Angular's out there. They offer different parts of the framework to get you up and running quickly. React, you do have to do a little bit digging around. It's like how to manage state, how to make network calls, and all that. It's not really just straight out of the box they provide that. So, when it freaks out, it freaks out. I didn't move to. All right, so React components. Let's kind of take a look at what a React component looks like. So this is a class-based React component. The class article extends React component. All React components have to have a render method. So the render method just returns descriptions of components that will be rendered eventually and turned into HTML. As you can see, I can write somewhat plain-looking HTML here. I can write divs, H1s, Ps, paragraph tags. You can see these little braces that kind of open and close for this.props.name. That's for passing props along. That's where it says accepts a set of props, which can be any type of JavaScript object, and you can render them out. So it's kind of has a little templating in it. You can also make functional components where the component is just a function that accepts props and spits those props out, rendered in the way you structured it. Components are basically just functions, given it being the class-based component or just the functional component. Just like a function that takes parameters and returns a result, components take in props and return UI. So given the same input props, you'll always get the same output, as long as you kind of keep that focus in mind. Because in the React components, you do have the opportunity to do if statements and loops and kind of do branches in your code, so you can get different results based on your input. But we try and focus on keeping same input, same output. It's easy to reason about, it's easy to pass the component along, it's easy to know what it's going to do. The syntax that React uses is called JSX. JSX, there's a compilation step with Webpack or Babel. So a lot of times when you're firing up a React application getting started, you can use what is called Create React App, and that'll give you everything that you need out of the box in order to cross-compile from the JSX to web. And this is generally what it looks like if you were to write a simple component that renders a div, says hello. It's actually going to translate that to a function call. React create this element, use a div tag. Null is there right now because it wasn't passing any props. And then put this child element in called hello, and it'll just render hello. JSX uses capitalization to differentiate between React components and HTML. You have to use standard HTML elements with lowercase, so like the div h1, just like you would in regular HTML. And then you have to use, when you import another component, it has to be capital case. If you don't do that, it'll try to treat it as a string, and it'll just kind of be like, heh, what is this? And again, you can use the curly braces to escape in and out of the JSX, so you can write any kind of piece of logic that you want. You can call a function that renders another component. You can just do simple ternary operators to say, hey, if this variable is set, render this thing or don't render it. So it kind of has, if you're familiar with templating languages where you just kind of open and close, PHP is what I'm most familiar with. You'd open up PHP tags, do some PHP, and then tell it to return and spit back out. This kind of is a little cleaner, and it just makes it kind of nice to say, hey, drop this, this string or this number or this function in here. So with React components, we try and keep everything together. Usually with CSS, HTML, and JavaScript and traditional web applications before all this, you would have all those files separate. You'd have a giant CSS file, or maybe use Sass, and you'd like set all your cascading style sheets off to the side. You'd put all your markup in one file. Then you'd attach a giant JavaScript library that you wrote that would look for an HTML element and then interact with that and bind events to it. It would just become pretty messy. We take the philosophy at Sift with how we design components is that if code frequently changes together, it should stay together. We make components, not templates. There's a couple ways to do this in React with style components or CSS in JS, which is called JSS, where you actually write CSS in JavaScript objects and it translates it all out. And it sounds very complicated, but all these libraries take care of it for you and make it very efficient. Later on I'll show one of those components what it could look like to have full-on CSS, HTML, and all the JavaScript together. So like I said, you can pass props into the React components. It's just the data objects that you want to display in your template. This article heading, this is actually rendered right now from this little piece of code. So I could say, hey, article heading, I'll give you a title, I'll give you a name, and it'll spit it out. So I always get the same consistent UI even with different contents of the props. Well, that overflows off. Nice. So props are read-only. You don't get to mutate them. React will actually yell at you if you attempt to mutate them and reset them. Like if you try and do this.props.name is equal to something else, it will not like that. It will kind of stop its rendering process. You can pass in any type that you want: strings, arrays, objects, functions, and then you can utilize them in different ways. So let's see. The prop types, as you can see up here, are kind of a type check that you can do at runtime in development mode. It won't do these type checks once you build for production. So if you kind of get like a little bit of type safety. Is anyone familiar with TypeScript? It provides a full-on like typing system for JavaScript that would be. It's very helpful actually when you go to refactor. JavaScript was really kind of annoying in not having types sometimes, and React put together prop types in order to kind of help assist that in development mode. So if you pass in a string to an expected number, like, hey, it'll still continue on, but it'll kind of just let you know it's got the wrong data type. So components also have what is called state internally, so they can accept props from the outside and then internally have state. This is a simple counter example that we can run. You know, I click the button, it runs the onClick handler, it calls this.setState, updates the counter by 1, and then re-renders the component. So anytime props change or anytime state changes, React will rerun your render method. You click this one a couple times, you know, and then yay, confetti. And then goodbye, confetti. So, like I said, state is held internally to the component. It will cause a re-render, and you cannot modify the state directly. You could technically, but React will kind of get a little funky on you. And you always want to call this .setState. That way, everything goes and fits in the render cycle for React. So it sees state changes, see props change. It'll queue them up and render them for you. Something that we like to think of that the views that you render are just a function of your state. So React components, just you give an input, the state, the props, whatever it is, it runs the function and it outputs the view. Same in, same out. And since we can think about these as functions, we can easily compose them, and it can just be a function of our state. So with props and with state internally, a lot of times web applications have larger and larger sets of data that they need to manage, like authentication. For a simple example, like to-do lists, like what to-do items do I have to render? Where do we generally put that? Sometimes you make a larger data store, or sometimes each component will be responsible for fetching, grabbing the to-dos, and holding on to those to-dos in its internal state, and then passing it down to children. But if there is a parallel component next to it, how do you get the data over there? It can be kind of messy. And so we use what is called Redux. Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. It helps you write applications that behave consistently and are easy to test. The funny thing about Redux is that it really didn't mean to become what it became initially. It was just a way to do time travel debugging of application state, and so you'd be able to store your application in this, or your state in this larger object, and then kind of time travel back and forth as you make changes to that state, and you could replay your UI, and they just grew from there into a pretty popular library for managing state in your application. So Redux works to help make state mutations predictable. The state is actually meant to be immutable. The only way to change it is through dispatching actions, and actions are handled through functions called reducers. These only return new portions of the state tree. I'll show an example of that later. Having a single store for an application can help make your UI easy to reason about, and it offers some useful techniques such as the time travel, logging of all updates, undo, redo, persistence, loading up snapshots. Something that we initially thought we'd be able to do, and other places do this, that if your JavaScript error is out, you can snapshot the state and send the state off in the log, the error log. I can then pull the error log in on my local machine, have that full state and get the application to the right spot. So that way it's really useful for debugging. So as I said, Redux will hold your application state. It's stored as a plain JavaScript object. So as you can see, this is a very simple one for maybe a to-do application, the good old standard to-do demos. Maybe you have to hold authentication for the user that's logged in, an API token to make API calls, and then you can hold the array of to-dos that a person has. The actions that you dispatch are just plain objects that tell the state what, or tell the reducers what to do, such as add to do. The text is feed the cats. So my to do list, I'm going to add feed the cats. I can delete a to do. I can tell it to delete ID number 3. And I generate these out of calling functions that create other objects that then tell it what to do. So these are these action creators. So in JavaScript, you want to run functions that will then dispatch these actions. And then your reducers will handle these actions and make state changes. So in this simple one here, you can see I handle I add a to-do. It brings in the state of my application, the whole state tree for that reducer that I'm on, and the action that was dispatched. So in this case, we can say add to-do text feed the cats. And then I can take the to-dos, I can return them. This is where the spready operator, the spread operator comes into play. Come back. Come back. Nope. Come on.
There you go.
Yes. And so I copy the array. I don't actually mutate the original array because we don't like to mutate things because that can cause inconsistent state. And so we mutate it, we add the new to-do into it, append it, and then we return that state. Oh my goodness. One of the interesting things to note is that reducers can be done in many different ways, and that you could have one large reducer to handle everything, or you could have a reducer for the authentication, you could have a reducer for the to-dos, and you can split your application up into different areas. And I'll actually show you a larger state for our application in a minute here. Let's see. So, here we go. I can see it on my screen.
I can see it on my screen.
Oh, you can see it too. Great.
There we go. Yeah, there we go.
All right. So data flow in Redux. Before I talked about one-way data flow or unidirectional data flow, this is what Redux does for you. It helps manage a state, and it helps you do it in a synchronous way. So that follow this little GIF here that's handy. So the state changes, updates your views cause an event, the action gets sent out to the dispatcher, and then reducers run. Okay, it's going to disappear.
That reduced.
This presentation is online somewhere, yeah?
Yeah, I'll send out the link. It's on my GitHub. You can just make a poll.
Okay. It might be easier to follow along on our screen.
Yeah, if you have NPM and Node installed, you can get it running. And where was it? Yeah, so what's really great about this is it's synchronous. It's not, you don't, like, when you have a bunch of events happening at one time and they're all running at different times, and if your state was to just kind of collide and everything was not to happen in one synchronous flow, they're all kind of like to go at different times, you have a hard time reasoning about who changed what and who did what. Redux allows only one action to be dispatched and ran at a time, and they all queue up. So it makes it very simple. Hopefully I'll show you in a second here how that all works out. So React and Redux are great together because components are able to hold on to their own internal state. However, that can become cumbersome over time if you're trying to manage it in each little component. What we like to do is store the state outside the component tree, which makes it a heck of a lot easier to share. Redux has little connector libraries that will help you connect your component to the Redux store, so it can subscribe to updates essentially. So all of your components in many different ways can get Redux store changes, re-render, redraw, and React handles all that re-rendering very efficiently. Let's see. Oh, we'll demo. Okay, cool. Maybe this will work pretty well. How do I go out of full screen? So. No, my internet. What was the password?
Mug meeting?
It was on disconnected. This is our loading screen if it doesn't load. Let's see if this works. There we go. Alright, so I'll go to the home page actually. So this is Sift. This is an application that we write at our company that is full React and Redux. It used to be Angular, and then about a year and a half ago, I think it was now, we converted it. It was actually an Angular app that bootstrapped React, and then we then made it a React app that then bootstrapped Angular to finish out the Angular, and then we finally converted the Angular and got all the Angular out. So it was a bit of a process, but actually both libraries played well together and just pretty much worked for a little while there. So you didn't know if you were an Angular app or React app for a little while. So it's just a simple app that I can go and do searches on. Let's take a look at some of the debug tools for React and Redux and kind of see what React actually looks like when it renders. So you might be pretty familiar with standard HTML and seeing all the different things that load up. Like if I go and inspect, I can see what was rendered, I can see my input, I can see my divs, I can see all that. Let's take a look at what React does. So if I want to go see a component, you can see this giant tree. It looks like a lot. There's a lot of different components that get wrapped in different ways that provide different functionalities such as theming, router, switch, styles, page components. It goes down and down and down and down. But I can get to a standard component that we have that's a grid, and I can see all the props that it was passed. I can't manipulate the props from here, but I can go to each one of these. So let me go to the input. So the input has no value at this time right now. If I type a value in it, you'll see that now gets a new value, which causes the component to re-render. One of the neat things about this debugger is I can highlight the updates on the page. So all these little boxes that are highlighting, that means React has been given the signal that something changed on the page or something changed through props or state. It's going to redraw those components. Sometimes we aren't efficient in telling things to update or not. There are what are called pure components that are available. React has certain lifecycle methods in it, such as one should component update, which will compare the previous props to the next props. If they're the same, it won't update. If they change, then it will cause a render cycle. So let's go back a little bit. Now combine this with Redux. This is the Redux debugger.
Are those just tabs added into the Chrome debugger?
Yeah, so they're Chrome developer tools. I think they have them for both Safari and for Firefox also. Let's see, is that big enough? So when I load up the application, yeah,
Can you make the browser
bigger.
Is there a scroll bar on the bottom and then you're missing the left side of the screen?
It's partial words.
Oh, it went into our breakpoint mode. Is that-
Oh, sorry, the projector's not showing the full screen. You see some.
There he is.
Oh, you're missing a little bit. Let's see here.
It's a projector problem thing, which doesn't mean it's not a problem, but. Yeah, there we go. There's a play button. It wasn't visible.
All right, so this application actually has a very large state tree. As you can see, we kind of section things out into our different models. We have clients, we have configurations, we have entities, we have a whole location for managing the browser's location. We have people that we hold in different ways. Right now this page has no people, so it doesn't store anything in it. And as the app loads up, it runs different actions to dispatch to either do network requests, manipulate data that it received, and as those return and fill out, you can see like different parts of the state tree change. So our client reducer handled client fetch underscore success and filled out a bunch of data. So now that data is accessible to any component that can get connected to Redux. And so what we like to do is we like to make what are called connected components. Those then spread things down to every little component that's in the render tree, and React handles efficiently updating and redrawing the DOM. And so like you can see when I type, you can see that I do update query. Oh, geez, it flashes on my screen first, and then it flashes back. So it does fetch autocomplete success, updates the query. This is where we store, in our Redux store, we actually store the value that is supposed to be in that text box. So every time you type in the text box, it does that whole flow from this GIF over here, where it dispatches an action through the dispatcher, the reducer handles it, some side effects happen through what is called Redux middleware to make network requests. Those network requests just sit there and turn. Then once those are done, they dispatch other actions that then will call, like fetch autocomplete success. That gives us all the data we need. We tell the application to re-render. So every time one of these actions goes out, there's a chance that the whole application redraws. It seems like a lot with that whole component tree that I showed, and it seems like it'd be very inefficient. But I didn't write the React library, and I trust that they did a good job at making it efficient because it works lickety-split for us in a lot of cases. We do have to be careful from time to time that we don't redraw everything absolutely every single time, and that can be very apparent on some of our screens. Oh my goodness.
Hey Matt?
Yeah.
I have a laptop here. I just installed the NPM stuff.
Oh.
I don't know if this will help or not. You want to try it or?
We could. I'm coming to a close, I guess. I'm a little quicker than I thought it would be. Let me see if this will show, because this was the one last thing. If I go into React, oh my goodness. It seems to get worse as I click, doesn't it?
I wonder if it's a power issue.
Well, it's like the projector thinks that the signal went away. And
Yeah.
Then it tries again.
On my side, I'm not getting any flickering.
Because you're not going through the projector. Yeah.
Let's see. So, at one point we had an issue in this application where typing these text boxes was super slow. It would cause actually the whole application to actually re-render when nothing was changing because of the way we did some state management. You can see a couple things still update that we haven't done, but mainly the main area now updates. But through Redux and some other libraries, we're able to say, hey, just watch this portion of the state tree. This is where Vue has some very nice things out of the box where you don't get this, okay, I gotta watch the whole thing and just render when the whole thing changes. Vue does have a two-way data binder available, so you can watch just a specific portion of your state and do updates from there. This was a little bit of a challenge to get around at first, but it works out pretty well. So, React and Redux, they're a powerful combination to build modern web apps with. It can be a bit daunting to get into, as I hopefully showed that it was a bit daunting with all those components that render. Our application is massive. React, but we try and keep all those components very simple. They all have one job to do. They have one thing to display. Some of them are responsible for loading data, others are just responsible for displaying that data. And we compose them in very functional ways, and we can reuse them quite a bit. There's a huge ecosystem out there, from styled UI libraries to API access patterns that help with this, but you can really kind of just create React app out of the box to draw any UI and efficiently update and render. It does take some time. This whole slide presentation is actually written in React. There was a library called Spectacle, because I was having trouble with PowerPoint with code highlighting or Keynote with highlighting. I was like, geez, Pete, how do I highlight code? I'll just write my slides in React. Why not? So these are all available on my GitHub. I can have Craig either post the link or something if you want to download them, check them out. It's just a talk on React and Redux. You can pull them in. Each slide is in its own little thing. They're actually very simple. They just have titles, they have typography available. There's actually a very nice library in here called Material UI. If anyone's familiar with Google's material design pattern, if you want to use that on the web, you want to use it out of the box, highly suggest Material UI. It's material-ui.com. It makes things a breeze from putting buttons and typography together. You don't have to mess with anything. And does anyone have any questions? I just feel like I just talked. Yes?
So I'd really like to start off with asking, is this open source? I was reading a little bit, and there's like quite a history to the open source as Facebook did some unusual wording in their
Yeah.
So is the state now that there were MIT license and everybody's cool with that?
It should be now, yes. React went through that. React Native, which is the equivalent for this but for iOS and Android, went through the same thing. They switched it a couple months later. But everyone was kind of like, I don't know if we should use React. And then they also started going to Vue or other Angular, other libraries. There were a bunch of them out there. But once they kind of switched that, other people kind of stuck and stayed with it a bit. But it should be good to go now. And most of the other third-party libraries follow the same licensing.
So you wrote your application in React, and what was it in before?
Angular.
And would you go back to Angular, the new Angular, or would you continue with React?
So I have very little experience with the new Angular. I hear it's pretty good. It's just not, I love React.
That's good though.
I think in React quite a bit with applications now, and I would stick with React. Maybe I might use Angular if I have to do something like really quick, because it offers a lot of things out of the box really quickly. I just feel that, this is my own opinion, I feel that Vue and Angular, those frameworks don't scale well on large teams. They don't scale well in building a large application. Two-way data binding becomes cumbersome after a while. It's like, who is changing what? Who is listening to what? The Redux flow with React gives us, all of our engineers, one spot to go and look for state changes, one spot to manipulate things, one spot to say, hey, when this happens, do this. And then everyone can kind of follow the same pattern. So that's why I always encourage React. But it can have a bit more of a get up to like a usable application speed than Angular or Vue out of the box. Yeah.
Sort of playing off that question a little bit, I was kind of wondering how this code is stored, managed, shared within a development group. Are you like throwing stuff on GitHub and downloading to your personal laptop, coding there, and then pushing to a normal test and develop environment and moving it to code to prod, or is this like a normal type of code development?
Yeah, that's pretty much our standard flow. So we have GitHub, everything's hosted up there. All of our devs pull and do branches. We follow Git flow. If you're familiar with that branching model where you have a master, a develop, you do all of your features off of develop. Everyone does that together. Good thing the word collaborates on feature branches. We do PRs, push it up, throw it because you can do it locally. Everything's local. Like both of these are run off localhost, so it's just running locally right now. It just feeds into our API here. This one's just off localhost, and then we push those to staging, test environments. It all works out just like a regular web application.
Okay, well, I'm seeing, do a little research and find out as we're talking here, and I see that there's people saying, oh, my repository or my components are better than the other components and all that type of thing. Is there like, I don't know if you're a development group, one standard component library that you pull and use, or do you mix and match, and do you have conflicts over which version to use?
No, so we decided that since our designer at our company wanted to use material.io, like Google's material design, there were a couple libraries out there, but this one, material-ui, was the one that we found to be the most complete and the one that gave us everything we needed out of the box. It's rare that this does not have what we need to make very basic components, and we assemble these in many different ways. We actually have another library, what is it, GitHub? We have a library called Skipper, which actually takes which actually takes the material UI, and it's where we put our business logic, it's where we compose reusable components out of material UI to share across applications. Our applications, we have an admin portal We have our Connect application, we have another one that we call Retain, we have one that we call Engage. They all use these same libraries, so we all try and commit things to these when we find them to be reusable. We have a bit of a rule that's don't put it into Skipper if you think you might share it, because you don't actually know if you will share it. Like, put it into Skipper once you've shared it amongst our applications, because a lot of times, developers can't predict the future. Sometimes we think we can, and so you start to write things in a generic API and it just doesn't work out, and then you're rewriting and updating a whole bunch of stuff that, well, flesh it out in one spot and then come back to it once you start reusing it. But I highly recommend this library. It does everything. It has buttons. They do the little pulsing, has bordered buttons, has raised buttons, has circular buttons. It has everything you need out of the box, and it comes with some good themes. You need autocomplete, nat bar, chips, anything out of the material IO library.
That's free to download?
This one is free. Yep.
Wow.
So they have,
A lot there.
I do believe they have some like demo sites somewhere that people have made, but our application is in this in full. They have all the selection controls you need. Comes with nice little animations. It even has an animation library built in. Has these cards, so you can get the nice little Material IO library card going on. Has little drop-down menus. That doesn't work there, but it's a great library. Any other questions? Open to anything.
I think that's written in React as well.
Yeah, yep, it is in React. And actually this library gave us a lot of ideas for how to structure and compose components. It's actually a great library to study if you want to kind of see how do I make a reusable library. Other libraries run into the pass me a million props to configure. This one is actually let's make a bunch of little mini components that compose things. So you have a card, you have card actions, card content, card header, card media, checkbox, or other libraries will be like, you have a card, give me a whole bunch of props, and it's really hard to like override or theme them, and you have to do a bunch of like not 1,000 props, like you end up with some of them that have like 80 props on them sometimes. It's like, whoa, that's way too many. What does all this do? They structure it very well by breaking each thing down, and then you have to compose the pieces together yourself. So it's actually a great library to look at as to how to structure a library.
How would you get started with React?
I go to the React documentation site. It is a great site. It has a great tutorial on it. There is what is called Create React App, which you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about Webpack, Babel, like it all working cross-browser and all that stuff. It just does it for you. There's React.js. Yeah. As you can see, I got some of my content for my slides here. It's great. They have simple components that you can play around with. I think you can play around with these. So you can see JSX, you can convert it back and forth. You can see what it would render, what it wouldn't. It can show you stateful components. This one's just counting up. They're simple to do, right? So I can say, hey, cool. They have great examples, great getting started. It shows you all the API, all the component life cycles. There's a lot to learn about React and how to do it efficiently and effectively, but it lets you get started pretty quickly.
So how does this compare to like other environments like HTML5 in terms of the number of sites that are using it, the number of developers that are aware of it?
That's a great question. I am not sure like the usage statistics. I know everyone likes to kind of look at GitHub stars every now and then as a metric. Like Vue.js actually surpassed React recently, but it's I don't know. Other than anecdotal evidence of people that I run into, a lot of people are using React versus Angular or Vue, but that's probably because I'm a bit biased with the people I find and the things I go to, because it's mostly about React. But it is pretty popular. I know Twitter uses it. I know Facebook uses it. Airbnb uses it. Funny thing is, Airbnb actually just dropped React Native. They have a whole great blog post about why they dropped it, which is an interesting read. We still continue to use React Native. It's a great library for us to actually share code between our web application and our mobile apps. So a lot of our reducers end up being shared in the reducer logic. So that way, all the network requests go through the same library for iOS, Android, and web. So we get great code reuse and share out of that. we have another library that we call Sift, which is a play on Redux and Sift, which we share all of our Redux state and logic in.
There's really a website for the state of JavaScript. It's called stateofjava.org, I think, or .com. I'm not sure, on computer actually. But that'll tell you what's the most popular framework, what are people using, if people like it. It starts with GitHub, salaries of front-end engineers, a lot of miscellaneous things.
State of JavaScript.
JavaScript. It's .com, yeah, stateofjs.com.
Anything?
But with React, can you do things like drag and drop if you're ordering a list or something?
Yes, yeah. Actually, what is that one called? Drag? What is that one?
Yeah, it's
Draggable.
sort of Hawk.
This is the great thing about Google, right?
Absolutely.
I want React sortable right now. Does this one have a demo? But it exists.
Okay.
Drag, and it actually makes it very easy to do, right? So this is a React component. We're actually able to take this and plug it in and just wrap our components in it. So the React sortable, what is called a higher order component. A higher order component in React just means another component doesn't actually render anything, but it wraps your component in additional functionality. So we can draw whatever items we want here, whatever React component we can put in, and then there's this sortable list higher order component that wraps it, and gives it the drag and drop functionality. It's a huge ecosystem, so anything you do, just about anything you can think of, somebody's probably written some library for it to help you out or to help give you an idea how to get started.
So if you were to develop an app in this and now move it to a web hosting company because you're having that, your customer's website is hosted there, how much of a problem is it to install, React libraries and the whole app?
It's really not hard at all. Are you talking like when you deploy it to production?
Yeah.
Right, so I'm just running this locally, and I could stop this whole thing right now, and I think this one has npm run build. I can tell it to just build, create an optimized production build over there, so
I see it, yeah.
left. I don't know if this will actually work here, because I haven't tried this one.
Okay.
But what this does is it runs through Webpack and Babel, which does all of the transforms. So when you write ES7 or ECMAScript 2017 or 2018 or whatever, they're not supported in browsers a lot of times yet. So people will write what are called polyfills, or it'll notice like, oh, you want to use a MapReduce kind of thing. It'll translate it into ES 2015 for you. So you don't have to worry about any of that. It'll automatically transpile and everything, give you JS files, give you HTML entry, like an index HTML, and away you go. That one just built. Did it build? Successful.
Yeah, it looked like it.
So you're producing all this stuff that's going to run in the client. What's the server back end? Node.js?
Our server infrastructure is Node.js. Yeah, so React is just you can make it a multi-page app. You can do server-side rendering, so every time you navigate, it actually renders React and then sends it back down to the browser and then rebinds everything. We do single-page apps, and all that does is plug into an API. You can plug into any API you want, really. You just have to make the network requests to fetch data. So your backend can be anything.
Is there CGI scripts or
It can be
WebSocket,
any,
or?
yeah, you can do WebSockets with it, right? You could hit PHP servers, you can do anything that'll spit out a standard JSON response, or if you want XML, or anything that you want to build for. It just can make network requests just like jQuery could.
Web service requests to a
Yep.
server.
Yep, yeah. So it does help us a little bit that we have a JavaScript backend, because then we can kind of do a little bit of code share of like, hey, these are plain old objects, these are plain old models, or here's some extra stuff to kind of share around. So, yes, and so it built, where did it build? Yeah, so it built all my CSS, JS. I wonder what that, let's go take a look at what that would look like. Yeah, actually we should open it in this folder. Let's see, there's static JS. Alright, this is probably gonna look like a bunch of gobbledygook. Minified,
Yep.
takes care of everything, all these things.
Wow.
Right.
How big is that blob?
big is that?
That's that big.
Static.js. Get info. That bot was 1.3 megs.
1.3 megs.
Yeah.
That's all.
Wow.
It's, oh yeah, I thought it would be smaller actually. I was hoping it'd be smaller. There's other things you can do to optimize stuff. Like if we go look at our application when we load up, I can look at just straight up JS that it downloads, load up. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes. But what do we have? Analytics, chunk. Chunk, just a little chunk downloaded. That was, how do I turn it? I got to turn off the cache. Disable cache. There we go. Download. 275 KB. Our main bundle is 1.3 megs. There's this nice thing that Great React App and React Router have in that it will split your code to be delivered to the front end. So if you build a giant application with hundreds of routes in it, it might end up totally being, like 20 or 30 or 40 megs in total, the whole application. It's a large application for someone to download. React Router has what is called code splitting per route. So that way, when the user ends up at a certain URL, they only download the code that is needed for that URL. And then it kind of gets all pieced together as you navigate the site. So you get an 800 KB file there, 1 meg file here, 250 KB there. So that way it can move along a little quicker for some. Sometimes you're like, take the whole 20 meg file or 30 meg file and just go.
Yeah, but you're gonna take that 20 meg file, so you got the download cost,
Yep.
which is not that big a deal. But then the browser's gotta do something with that
Yep.
20 megs.
Yep, so that's why we do the code splitting. Actually, the funny thing is the code splitting does actually end up being larger than the single bundle because it tries to efficiently pack things, but it ends up with code reuse in each one. The main bundle file that loads up here has most of what Webpack could find as shared code. And then the chunk is really what this section needed. As you can see, all this is translated into ES 2015, so it looks kind of crazy. I cannot imagine writing this instead of writing all the JSX like nice and clean.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you test React components?
How do you test React components? So there's a great test library called Jest that comes with the Create React app. Generally, what you would do to test the React component, let's go take a look at one of these components here. Just as take a look at one of the slides. Let's do some. Come on, I can't see. Actually, this one is real easy to test because what you can tell the test runner to do is do a shallow render, and what that means is it's only going to render the top level items. It's not going to render subcomponents. So in case of this one, it actually wouldn't render typography, but I could check to see it was going to possibly render typography. So you can just do little checks of saying, hey, when you render, do you have these items? That's generally how we end up doing the tests for the UI. If we have any code branches, we test those code branches of like, hey, if I give it this prop, because I know there's an if statement to switch it up, does it now render this? So it's pretty nice, and all those libraries take care of most of it for you. Did that help answer a bit? Yes.
So the state of JS site has some information. It looks like there's a survey that goes out every year, 26,000 front-end developers, and over half of them are using React.
It's pretty
Popular amongst React users.
Bad to bad.
And those who will respond to that survey.
How do you get to?
Now, if you look at job listings and whatnot, generally speaking, most of them are for anything that does front end stuff. They'll generally have React or something along those lines.
Angular or React.
But
Yeah, you end up thinking
more
about
often than
React.
not, it's React. I mean, finding something that has Angular or Vue or anything like that is pretty uncommon.
Got a lot of no frameworks. Yeah. So give it a try sometime if you want to get into some front-end web development. Like I said, though, if you want to check out Vue, you want to check out Angular, they're also great. They have great ecosystems themselves. Some get up running in different ways quicker. But if you want to. You can also write a jQuery app still if you'd like, but that becomes a little cumbersome over time as it grows. I've written plenty of those, and I personally would not go back to writing a jQuery application unless I had one page with very little interaction on it. I see you do something like click a button or do a file upload. But if you're going to build an actual web application, a front-end single-page application, I highly recommend checking out React, giving it a go, pairing it with Redux. There's another one called MobX, which does two-way data binding, so that way you can get the whole, like, I change this, it updates, and like just go back and forth if you want to have that model. And it can work really well for smaller applications, but as it grows, you'll start to kind of feel the pain a bit of that two-way data binding. Like, ooh, why did you change that over there? Redux helps minify that in your head and the flow a bit of who changed what. Highly suggest you support immutable objects. There's a library called immutable.js, which can freeze your objects so that no one can actually mutate them, so you have to copy them. Otherwise, it throws errors at runtime. So it's kind of a neat library to check out. Anyone else? More.
So if you wanted to introduce this to a community of people, what kind of tooling would you throw in? Would you just throw a server out there and throw the code in and let people have at it, or is there some methodology you suggest?
If I was interested, to make it like a workshop kind of type thing,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have anyone actually connect to any other service, right? I would just have them pull in what is called Create React App, which takes care of a lot of the nuts and bolts to getting it to run in the browser for you. Because all you really do is do Create React App, the name of your app, it builds it all for you, then you go into that folder, you type npm run start, and off it goes. And then you can start editing the JS files, creating React components. You don't have to worry about any of the real-time reloading. So like over here, let me go from this one, when I have this up and running, so when I do npm run start, make this smaller, there was this thing for a while just called hot reloading, where it was kind of a pain to set up, but like I have this slide, Redux Concepts, which is this one. Let's go to the title slide actually, so go all the way along. If I want this gone, the housekeeping one, and I write the file, it should auto reload. Now it's gone. So it takes care of the whole compilation step, the whole telling the browser that something changed. And you can really get pretty far without having to do like network requests or any of that. You can build a lot of concepts of how to draw and compose components without the network. Because this whole Material UI library has nothing to do with any network requests at all. You can build a whole fully functioning UI without calling to data, and you just have it local, like a simple to-do app. Usually that's what everyone likes to go to, is a to-do application. So that's kind of how I would introduce it, is like, yeah, let's build a to-do app with React. First we'll build it without even having Redux, and then we can see how that goes, and then we can introduce Redux to add more state.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you.